So we've been doing an introduction to Philemon, one of the smallest epistles in the New Testament, and really trying to make sure that as we enter into its contents, that we can actually see it for what it's saying. And so we've had to deal with the whole concept of slavery and how that works biblically. I think last Friday was a good exercise in our own mind as to why the whole idea of slavery cannot be summarily divorced from the believer's thinking, since eternity encompasses a slave-master relationship of the highest level of quality. So we did argue for the possibility of love being prominent and imminent and pervasive and exhibitional in the context of a slavery situation, which is what we're going to be pressing into today. The title of today's study, which will draw us into Friday as well, is Philemon, I'd rather beseech you. I'd rather beseech you. This would describe the humility of the slave. And if you already kind of know the drama at view, all four persons that we are taking into consideration in the book of Philemon are slave models for us. The Apostle Paul is a slave. Philemon is a slave. Onesimus is a slave. And of course, all three of these slaves has as their anchoring model the Lord Jesus Christ, who is the ultimate Ebed, doulos of God. This would make us all slaves. So this is relevant to us. I'm going to open us in a word of prayer, and then we're going to do a kind of massaging through verses 1 through verse 13. We'll probably only get to point 4 as an introduction and then pick it up on Friday because of what the apostle does in engaging Philemon to assist in bringing about a corrective in the family of God between him and Onesimus. So let's pray. Father, thank you for your kindness. Thank you for your grace for those that are present, for those that are coming, give them grace as well. For those that are watching and who will watch, Lord, may the emblems of your son's submission to you become evident in our life, both in terms of our conduct and in terms of our character. Help us to see the beauty of the relationship that exists between these four men and how they are working out their salvation with fear and trembling. And let it be to us again a number of deep lessons on the what to do and how to do it and the why to do what is right in your sight. So we're coming to you as the people of God, and we're asking for your mercy at this time. Open our eyes that we might behold the wonders of your law. Grant us the ability, Lord, to actually peer into the subject matter here and it be relevant to us. We're coming to you on the grounds of your son's blood. It's our cleansing, our purging, our washing, our sanctification for sure. And we come to you on the grounds of his person, his righteousness, which is our standing, irrevocable, immutable, unchangeable for all eternity. It is our confidence. Help us to see how we too can work through the complexity and offenses of relationship that exist among slaves. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I'm going to read verses 1 through 12, and then we're going to unpack, just kind of work our way through. We got about 45, 50 minutes, so we're going to work our way through, and you can be ready for questions on Friday. Verse 1, Paul, a prisoner of Jesus Christ, and Timothy, our brother, unto Philemon, our dearly beloved and fellow laborer, and to our beloved Apphia and Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church in your house. Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank my God, making mention of you always in my prayers, hearing of your love and faith, which you have toward the Lord Jesus and toward all the saints, that the communication of your faith may become effectual by the acknowledging of every good thing which is in you in Christ Jesus. For we have great joy and consolation in your love, because the bowels of the saints are refreshed by thee, brother. Wherefore, though I might be much bold in Christ to enjoin thee that which is convenient, yet for love's sake I'd rather beseech you, being such a one as Paul the aged, and now also a prisoner of Jesus Christ. I beseech you for my son Onesimus, whom I have begotten in my bonds, which in time past was to thee unprofitable, but now profitable to you and to me, whom I have sent again. Thou therefore receive him, that is mine own bowels, whom I would have retained with me, that in your place or your stead he might have ministered unto me in the bonds of the gospel. We're going to stop right there because Paul begins at verse 13 to start being very personal in his relationship to Philemon. And I'm hoping that by Friday we'll get a chance to actually really investigate and analyze Paul's motive and obviously his method. And remembering that at the same time, this is the Spirit of God calling upon us to learn how to deal with sticky situations. Very problematic situations. So under point number 1, and remember the title, I'd rather beseech you. I'd rather beseech you. This is where Paul is going when we look over in verse 8. Wherefore, though I might be much bold in Christ to enjoin thee that which is convenient. I hope to be able to deal with that in the next 30 minutes. Yet for love's sake, I'd rather what? Beseech you. Right. So this is an alternative mode of dealing with something very sticky and difficult. And you'll notice that what Paul is doing there is understanding an option that he has. He has an option. The first option is authoritative. The second option, which he is choosing, is influential. And we want to look at both of those, why that is the case. So under point number 1, what we are is the way that I'm kind of addressing verses 1, 2, and 3. What we are. I could use it in a question form. What are we? Well, we are two things according to verse 1. And this is Paul being inclusive. A prisoner of Jesus Christ and Timothy, our brother. These are the two writing. Paul is writing via Timothy with Timothy's presence. Timothy is probably serving Paul in some manner while he is in prison. Unto Philemon, our dearly beloved. Now, again, I want to lift that a little bit so that we can avoid the mistake of shallow hearing. Our dearly beloved. The term is really a word that Paul uses frequently, and the New Testament uses it quite a bit too. I don't know if it's a term that we as Christians employ as much, but if we were to employ this term as sort of a description of our affection towards someone, agapetos. Dearly beloved, it is rooted in the word, obviously, what? Agape, right. Dearly beloved, the term carries with it some very significant meaning, first and foremost at a relational level, which I warned you a couple of weeks ago that the book of Philemon is profoundly what in nature? Relational, profoundly relational. And so if we keep that as a kind of prominent characteristic of the letter, then we'll understand what agapetos is meaning when he is saying to Philemon, you are our dearly beloved. Dearly beloved. And it's one term, agapetos. And the way that phrase is used, our dearly beloved, is first used in the New Testament where? In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 3 verse 17. Listen to it. Matthew 3:17. And the first mention of it in the New Testament, kind of weight that word carries. This is the heavens being opened up, and this is God the Father speaking. Again, this is not a common event. This is a very special event of which the believer would take great care to mark. So the Father is speaking in the New Testament for the first time, and his expression is about his honor and devotion and assessment of his son. And you've heard it before, but let it come home in terms of what we call the three covenant frameworks: father, son, king, servant, husband, wife. So this term agapetos is going to be used throughout the New Testament by Christ, by Paul, a little bit by John. Agapetos is the term. And lo, a voice from heaven saying, "This is my dearly beloved son." So now, if we have respect for God the Father, and we have love for God the Son, then we can take this term agapetos and understand it as a high expression of profound honor and devotion to its object. And it's something actually that is to be employed on a vocal level so that people know it. Agapetos is the characteristic described of Jesus' view in the eyes of his Father. His Father loves him. He is the affection of the Father's heart. He is the pride and joy, if we would use an anthropomorphical connotation, to the Father. Here, the Father is commending his Son at his baptism. We call this the Annunciation in theology. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am" what? Right, so that's called an exegetical, by the way, in theology. What that means is that if the noun or the verb or the adjective that is being employed doesn't come through, let me make it plain to you. When I say "this is my dearly beloved son," it means I am profoundly satisfied with who he is and what he does. I want everybody to know that there are no qualms between me and my son. I want everybody to know that when I focus on him, he becomes for me an absolute contemplation of satisfaction and joy. That's the way you want to begin to understand the relationship, subject-object relationship between Christ and the Lord Jesus Christ. If therefore then Paul would use the term agapetos with Philemon in that way, then what Paul would be saying to Philemon is the same thing we're deriving from the Father to the Son. That Paul's delight in Philemon is such that he finds great honor and great joy and great satisfaction in him. It would really be a kind of evaluation mark. Here is what I am saying to you, Philemon. You bring me great pleasure and joy. And then again, when we use the term pleasure, we've got to be careful also to understand "this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." The idea of being well pleased means that he takes joy in not only who Christ is, but what he has done. This would be the idea of the book of Proverbs. An obedient son brings joy to his parents. An obedient son brings joy to his mother, brings joy to his father, and any parent with any child would know that when the child is demonstrating that unusual period of time in their life where they're doing exactly what mom and dad are saying, or where you elicit from them that kind of filial obedience that draws that out. It would imply to me that when Paul and Timothy is writing with Paul echoing, it would imply to me that Philemon is not just a general believer hanging out, meandering. He would be the kind of believer who is actually operating in his calling in a kind of way for which the Apostle Paul is exceedingly happy. Just want you to get that. He's not just a general believer out there where we don't know where they are. We don't know what they're up to. I mean, they call themselves a believer. I do remember the day we baptized them, but from that day on, I don't know where they're at. You guys understand what I'm getting at? Right, so this expression is not like a throwaway term that you simply say about somebody. They really bring you joy when you actually think about who they are and what they are doing. Conversely, people can bring you sorrow. They can bring you grief. They can bring you burden. And hence, I wanted to drill home on that the relationship between the Apostle Paul and Philemon is such, and this is really a mark of what the believer is called to be. Look at with me Ephesians 5:1. Now, this is Paul using the term again to the church at Ephesus. And he's speaking to the church in general, which means he would be speaking to you and me. And this here is called an imperative. So listen to the imperative, because the imperative here is a set of instructions as to how and why we should carry ourselves a particular way. Here it is. Be ye therefore what of God? Followers of God. There it is. Followers of God. Be ye therefore followers of God. Now he explains it. This is what it looks like. As children that are dearly beloved. Did you follow that? As children that are dearly beloved. So I want us to, again, stretch that out a little bit. Dearly beloved children are marked out not merely because of their ontological relationship to daddy, but because of their walking, as the text says, are following God in a fashion by which they are glorifying their daddy. That makes sense, doesn't it? Right. So what Paul is doing here is saying to the church at Ephesus, which is, they're not too bad off. They're pretty good. They don't have the maladies and problems that we're going to learn about on Sunday with Jephthah. Even though Jephthah is saved, it's going to be a little tough. The church at Ephesus doesn't have the problem that the Corinthians have. The church at Ephesus doesn't even have the challenges that the Galatians do. The church at Ephesus, therefore, is called by Paul to continue in a behavior pattern that exhibits to the world that you are dearly beloved of God. And what that means is be a follower of him. Now, all you got to do is walk that text out 3 or 4 or 5 verses, and you'll see what it says. Look at verse 2 of Ephesians 2. And walk in what? There it is. So I could lift that line up and say that what you and I have going on in the book of Philemon is the working out of a relationship in love. Would that make some sense? That the apostle is driven by the Spirit of God to take 2 men along with himself and forge an act, an allegiance, a collaboration that would amount to walking in what? Right, which is a lot of work. That's why I think this epistle is so precious. Walk in love as Christ also has what? So when we go back to verse 1, here's what you mark in verse 1. Go back to verse 1. I want you to see it. Because it could be easily said, if you tell me to be a follower of God, and you don't show me how that is done, you open me wide up to the grandest speculations of trying to do something in relationship to a God who fundamentally cannot be comprehended. Yeah. So look at it again. May God wake you up. Think about this. Be followers of God. Now, how am I going to do that? God is invisible. He's omnipresent. He's immutable, unchangeable. There are so many qualities in God that are non-communicable, right? God is perfect, right? God is immutable. God is all-powerful. God is infinite in his wisdom. Come on, man. How are you going to tell me to do that? I can't do that. Is that right? So now I can't follow God and mimic him in those qualities. Can't be done. So what is necessary for me to be a follower of God is given to us in the subsequent verses. We are only capable of being followers of God as dear children as we follow Christ. Look at the next verse again. I want you to see it. Verse 2. And walk in love. Here we go. This is what we call a parallel clause. As Christ hath what? So Christ is the hinge pin. He's the medium between us and God so that we can actually walk with God by walking with Christ and therefore pleasing God by doing the things that Christ has done, since we already take the positional view that Christ is in us, right? Is Christ in us? So if he's in us, then it is possible for this imperative to work itself out. If Christ is not in us, the imperative of Ephesians 5:1 cannot be done. No one can be a follower of God apart from being a follower of Christ. And God will not be known or seen or comprehended or nudged in the direction of any kind of obedience or contemplation by us unless Christ is in us, working through us to create that line of contact between God and them. Does that follow? It's very important to get. So I could make it really simple. If the agapetos, the dearly beloved description is going to be practically manifested in your life and mine, it's only going to be because in fact of matter, Christ is working in us. Okay, so I want to leave that like that, because in Philemon, go back there, in Philemon, what Paul is asserting is a post de facto affirmation of his pleasure in Philemon. And that matters, as we're about to see here in a moment. So under point number 1, to our beloved. And what I would state is that it underscores, as your outline has, a special sonship category to it. A special sonship. If we're sons and daughters of God, that's special. That's special. So I'll leave that there for now. We could draw out a lot of passages. Look with me at subpoint B, because the Apostle Paul also says not only is Philemon his dearly beloved, but then he also calls him a fellow what? Right. So for me, this here is an added element of insight into the first part. Not only is he an agapetos in terms of dearly beloved, but he is now viewed as a fellow. That's somebody that walks along with you, that has levels of compatibility with you, which will constitute kind begetting kind, or how can two walk together except they be what? Agreed. So when we talk about fellow laborers, going to help you with that concept because it's important. So the first one has to do with the kind of characteristic of the relationship, the character of the relationship. The second one has to do with the conduct of the relationship. What is the mode of relationship conduct-wise? They are fellow what? Laborers. Now here's the term that some of you have learned at Grace that others may not know, and this would be a preposition soon. Soon is the term like con in English, and it means with. It can be also translated together. Now the other word, which is our main verb, is the term ergon, from which we get the term what? Energy. Energy. Soon ergon. And I'm going to lift that up here now, because what the Apostle Paul says is that not only is Philemon a dearly beloved, he is one who co-labors, employing energy along with us in the task of the gospel. He employs energy. He emits energy. He functions a practice that amounts to the exertion of energy. Ergon is the term, and it literally is translated work. He is a fellow worker. You guys have heard that one in the New Testament, right? He's a fellow worker. Ergon means to employ, exert energy in a task or a job. And when two people do it, it's called synergy. You guys have heard the term monergy, a single energy component. You've heard the term synergy, right? Where two work together synonymously to exert what? Energy in a task. I'm gonna take you down that path for a minute here. Here's a very common verse. We use this verse in our WTC. It's Philippians 2:12. Let's look at that, because here I want you to think through what Paul is saying. Wherefore here's our word again, agapetos. Wherefore my agapetos, as you have always what? Okay, now that line, as you have always obeyed, again, immediately directs our attention to who? Jesus. Because Jesus obeys the Father, does he not? So remember, when you and I are reading indicatives relative to our obedience, never disassociate it from his obedience. Because the moment you disassociate your obedience from Christ's obedience, your obedience then is generated by yourself. It's not a synergy or synergy. It is a monergy. Raise your hand if you got that. Right. Monergy, meaning that you are not co-laboring with God to produce that outcome. You are functioning in your own strength. Did you get that? Right. So I want you to see how Paul uses this language to show you the importance of the believer consistently and relentlessly drawing from his or her relationship with God the energy to be the dearly beloved. That's making sense now, isn't it? Here it is. Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my what? And we talked about that. Is that not a paradigm of where Christ is in our relationship with him? He's absent now. And our obedience to him is via the third person. Right? Our obedience to Christ is via the third person. That's the whole of John chapter 14 through 16. I must go away in order to send the Comforter to you. If I don't send him to you, you cannot know the Father and you cannot know me. The Comforter will take what you know of me and exponentially increase it, because Christ by the Spirit will be in them, as well as the Father. So the third person becomes really the what we would call the source of power by which the believer now enters into a practical knowledge of God in terms of obedience. But now, much more in my absence, do what? Work out. Do you see that? Work out. In ergon, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Work it out. Work it out. So the believer is constantly engaged in a synergon, or a synergy of working. And just to keep it grammatically appropriate, Paul is talking to the church as a collective. He's not talking to one individual. He's talking to a collective. So capture this. This is Paul representing Christ, speaking to the body. Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, who? The church as a whole. Not just one believer, the church as a whole. Not as in my presence only, but much more in my absence. Work out your plural verb form. Y'all. Work out y'all's salvation with what? Fear and trembling. These are the qualitative attributes of believers who are serious about finishing well. Now, it would infer here a collaboration among the people of God, wouldn't it? It would infer a collaboration among the people of God, which is what I want you to drive home. Because if you take the church at Philippi and you take the Philemon text, there is something in common there. In Philippi, there was a problem between two women. You guys remember that? And it became so prominent that Paul heard about it. And he's writing to them to work that out. And he would extend that conflict to the whole church. Hey, work your issues out. Work your issues out with what? Fear and trembling. And what's really interesting is in Philippians 2:12, which is where we're getting ready to go back to. Who knows what Philippians 2:9 through 11 teach us? It's called the Carmen Christi. Look at verse 9. Philippians 2:9. Listen to it. Wherefore God hath highly what? Exalted him. Well, why did God highly exalt him? Because he humbled himself. He took on the role of a slave. You guys remember that? Look back at verse 7. Look back at verse 7 and notice what it says, Philippians 2:7. But he made himself of no reputation, and he took on him the form of a what? That's your doulos. Now we're talking about Jesus. So remember what I'm saying? When we are given imperatives to indicatively work out, we are never called upon to try to do them in our own strength. The motivating drive for obedience to the Father is the obedience of the Son as not only a model for us, but a source of power by which we replicate what he did in the world since we're his body. Is that coming home? Very important, very important. He made himself of no reputation. That means it's not about you and me either. See where the problem comes in with us often? So here Jesus is doing what the Carmen Christie says, even though he existed in nature as God, he didn't take advantage of telling everybody and causing everybody to remember, hey, I'm God. And I used to say it quite a bit to the saints at Grace for years. Hey, you ain't got to tell nobody you're a child of God. You've heard me say it. It's so counterintuitive in this era in which we are so insecure in ourselves. We want everybody to know we sit at the elbow of God. Well, Jesus didn't do that because it wasn't necessary. So this gives you an insight into the security that Christ had with his Father. But it also gives you an insight into the insecurity that we have often when we want people to know we're children of God. So you'll know that an individual is a child of God only if you understand what the fruits of a child of God are, because you shall know them by their what? Not by what they say. Everybody calls themselves children of God. That doesn't make you a child of God. Y'all keeping up with me? So now notice again what Jesus does here. And Paul uses the humility and condescension of Jesus to cudgel the Philippians to obey and work out their salvation with fear and trembling, as would a slave. Would a slave be operating out of fear and trembling? Of course he would, in the healthy sense of wanting to honor his master. And so it's being asserted here as well. But he made himself of no reputation, took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Some theologians, and I agree with them, said he really stepped down when he took on the role of a slave. But it got worse when he took on the role of a human being. That'll come home in a minute. It's really true, though. It's really true. It's really true how condescending God was in taking on our nature. And this is what made him a slave. And he has our nature for all eternity. So he is Yahweh's eternal Ebed, right? He is the righteous slave of Yahweh for all eternity, as are we. And we mark out that truth in what is called the incarnation. The incarnation for us as Christians affirm God's condescending love to enter into fellowship with us, to enter into sun ergon. Soon ergon, an energy that works with us and in us and through us and for us in order that he might be glorified. All right, good. Go then back to our text. Since I kind of massaged that, I got a little more time. Let me go to point number 2, because we could really work through the idea of co-laboring. I will only say to you about that as we go to point number 2. Is that to the degree that we understand the collaborative, that's what it means, collaborative process, to that degree, you and I will see the commendation coming out of verses 3 through 7. To the degree that I do not honor the idea of collaborating, to that degree, I cut myself off from the blessing of the resources that God uses to be able to build me up and use me in the faith. Does that make some sense? Of course it does, because when Jesus came and assumed a human nature, he didn't exist out in the desert all by himself. He came and abode with the family. He had a mama, and he had a stepdaddy, and he had brothers and sisters. And when he was called into ministry, he gathered men and women from everywhere to partner with him. Jesus didn't do anything. Even when he went to the cross, he brought his partners with him. You guys got that? Synergism. Pray with me. for 1 hour. All right, just trying to drive the point home, okay? Really trying to drive the point home to help you get it. So we are not only fellow laborers, but we are also fellow what? Good. Now this one here really jazzed me. And so I'm going to try to get through it because I really want to get to Paul's meddling with Philemon, because he's going to teach you and me about how to meddle the right way. How to meddle with people to bring the best out in them. We all know how to meddle with people, don't we? But we're not always good at it so that the outcome is right. And that's what I want us to be able to see. So we are clearly fellow laborers, but we are also fellow soldiers. Fellow soldiers, and that needs to be lifted up just a little bit as well. So I want to lift that up too and drive that home. I want you to think about you being a soldier. And I want to talk about what that is in relationship to our captain. Now, who is our captain? Jesus. And if we are soldiers, this is a second category of what we learned on Friday about slavery. Remember what we learned is that a soldier is a military slave. Did we learn that? Right. So we can be a familial slave in the generic domestic sense, but we can also be a military slave. And that takes on different attributes and characteristics that I want you to see here. I love this because Paul uses that concept. Under point number 2, we are therefore strategically placed in the what? That's right. So every believer, when you're born again, whether you know it, when you're brought into the kingdom of God, you're not only brought into the family of God and generally in terms of a domestic relationship that's on a par with sons and daughters of God and God the Father and the Holy Spirit, if you will, a kind of paraclete, or what the Old Testament would call a steward, to grow us up as children of God. We understand all that, but we are also therefore soldiers assigned positions in God's army. All right, and that's really important to get. Strategically placed in the battle. And see that term strategic up there? Our words for soldier that Paul uses for Archippus and Aphia in verse 2. Look at verse 2. And to our beloved, see, he uses agapetos again, doesn't he? He wants to make sure that at the height of the several adjectives describing the people of God is agapetos. That makes sense, right? God is what? And so proceeding out of the prominent attribute of God as love would be all these other qualities. That makes sense. That makes sense. You got to get that. Right. And so not only is God love, God is also the Lord of hosts. He is the general of his army. And we are in the army of God, either in the celestial dimension or the terrestrial dimension. Are the angels military slaves of God? Right. The whole system of angelic beings operates out of a hierarchy of military. Right. Michael, the archangel, is a general. Gabriel, the archangel, is a general. The cherubim are military soldiers that guard the throne of God. The seraphim are soldiers that we saw in the book of Revelation. When they proceed out of the temple, they proceed out with weapons of war to deal with God's adversaries, right? So the whole motif of warfare brings us to the point again of understanding that we are soldiers. And under point number 2, fellow soldiers, we are Philemon 2, subpoint A, sister Aphia, and brother Archippus. So if you have a King James version, the word beloved there is in what we call the feminine form of the noun, and it implies that Aphia is a female, okay? Just want you to know that some of your translations will actually have not beloved Aphia, but sister, okay? Because it's a female there. Aphia probably is the wife of Archippus, our fellow soldier. That's in the masculine genitive form. Does that make some sense? And it probably underscores that they have a church in their home, which in the early church, there were what are called house churches. You can go to Romans 16 and see that fully explicated. So a house church could have as few as 5 people, 10 people, or as large as 20, 30, 40, 50 people. You know, we have basically monopolized Christianity at the level that, you know, we don't even feel comfortable unless we got 200-300 people to call it a church. But in the early church, it was a couple of families. Okay? A couple of families. And they walked as Christians. And that means that they needed to not only operate in the familial love of brethren at the divine level, but they still had to walk in structure and in order. That's what the term soldier means. It is the term that we have in our English, stratuo, from which we get the term what? Strategy. Strategic. Strategic. As a believer is brought into the fellowship of God, he is strategically placed in a military mode where God flanks you and positions you so you can best serve in the promulgation of the gospel and the defense of the gospel. Let's start with a few verses. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 3. 2 Timothy 2, 3. Listen to this. Thou therefore endure hardness as a what? Right. And you and I are going through the book of Judges. And what is the theme for us in the book of Judges? Fight the good fight of faith. And it comes from Timothy too. So you got the General Paul speaking to Timothy, who was a captain, telling Timothy, stand your ground. Don't vacate your premises. You got a lot of soldiers under you too that need to make sure they understand where they are. Remember what I shared with you. In war, there are 2 things that are fundamentally important to success. And one is intelligence, knowing what the general wants, knowing what the enemy is thinking. And then secondly, positioning yourself for victory, positioning yourself that you might be able to win that battle, either push back the enemy or totally subdue them. And that is why Paul uses this metaphor a lot. Look at Matthew chapter 8. Verse 7, you're going to see how this word is used. And this one is, I think, also in relationship to, let me start here. And Jesus said unto him, I will come and heal him. Go back to verse 5. Please go back. Yeah, I'll get here in a second. Go back to verse 5 and let's walk up. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him what? You know this account. The centurion has a servant, a slave, who is sick. And the centurion has great respect and honor for Jesus. This is a great example of what I'm getting ready to talk about. And the centurion beseeching him, verse 6, saying, Lord, my slave lieth at home, what? Sick of the palsy and grievously what? So stay right there. So what we can easily do is understand the larger redemptive and spiritual application of this centurion soldier not going to Caesar, not going to Pontius Pilate, not going to Agrippa, not going to the high priest, going to Christ. God opens the eyes of this Gentile centurion leader. He's a monster by nature. They kill people. But he has found Jesus to be who he is, Messiah. And something is going on here. Do you know what that is? He loves his slave. You keeping up with me? So remember what we did on Friday? We argued the fallacy of the assumption that a slave-master relationship is nothing but oppression. Because we're dismantling the prevalent, toxic, parasitical ideology of neo-Marxist hatred to define everything in binary terms of oppressor and oppressed. Utterly denying the reality of relationships among human beings can coexist at the same time a hierarchy of authority and subordination with love and affection. So I want to make sure I repeat that so you can get it. What Marx would love you to believe from the grave with his emissaries, that any kind of relationship where it's defined as a head over somebody, or a master over somebody or a ruler over somebody is necessarily oppression. That is all of the critical theory we've been dealing with for 100 years. Is that true? And I warned you that it's not biblical. Not only is it not biblical, it is not historically true as the sum total of all relationships on the planet. And therefore, because it's ahistorical, it's a lie that must never be embraced. Are there abusive, authoritarian people? Absolutely. They could be your brother or your sister in your family as siblings. You could have been one until God saved you. Is that true? And so not David. So we are not asserting by definitely denying the assertion that generally across the board that all structures of authority are bad and oppressive. Look at this account. So if we bought the presupposition that all authority structures are bad on the surface of it, Jesus is woefully negligent here. Because he has a wonderful opportunity to rebuke a monster and say, let that slave go. Y'all keeping up with me? Very important. This is why liberals despise the Bible. It's important for you to know that either God's true and the Word of God paints the picture of humanity as it really is, or it doesn't. So here's the situation that comes up. This centurion honors Jesus and loves his slave. Is that slave in a wonderful position? That slave has a master who knows how to get to Christ and appeal to the healer of all mankind on his behalf. See it? And saying, Lord, my servant lies at home sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. He cares for him, doesn't he? Verse 9. And Jesus said unto him, please hear this, I will come and heal him. That brother knows how to pray, doesn't he? Because the Lord is not only going to heal him, he's going to come and heal him. I'm headed to this brother's house. A lot of extremely important indicators here around the way in which Jesus makes himself available to people who actually believe him. You see it? But now watch what this centurion does in light of this massive privilege that Jesus is here rendering to him. Look at it. This is very important. The centurion answered and said, Lord, this here is what is called the diminutive of kurios. Lord, really master, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof. There you go. So now, will you not mark with me that this centurion is functioning like a slave? Of course. You see the subtitle of our outline is that of the humility of a slave. He's not arrogantly asserting to himself the right and privilege and constitution that makes him worthy for Jesus to come under his roof. So, you know, the principle is very clear. Whosoever shall humble himself before God shall be what? Exalted. And the centurion here really can be a model and representation of Jesus. Quite frankly, watch this. I'm not worthy that I should come under your roof, but if you speak the word only, my slave shall be healed. See how powerful that is? Do you see that? It's amazing. It's amazing. And the next verse just becomes this flowering, blooming opportunity for Christ to boast in this centurion. He says, for I'm a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this man what? And he goes. And to another what? And he comes. And to my slaves, do this. And guess what? Right. See, Marx would be rolling over in his grave right now. And everybody that is askew when it comes to the priority of relationships in hierarchical structures that God sets up for his glory. He says, I'm used to telling people what to do, and they do it. Because of that, I understand you as Messiah, Yeshua. You are the Lord's Hashim. All you got to do is speak the word and it's done. What a profound insight into this man's level of faith, which he gets from being in a position of authority, but also being in a constitution of humility. He can see that Christ can do it. And so he says, Lord, don't waste your time coming over my house. Just heal my servant. Now, we're almost done with this time because time just flies like that. Tell me something. Did this labor of love that this centurion is engaging in, does it depict the synergism that we saw earlier of the co-laborers? Did the centurion enter into a co-laboring project with Christ? Please. First he sought him out. Then he prayed. And the Lord entered into the yoke fellowship of communion to answer his prayer. Right. And so there you go. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God that worketh in you the will and to do of his good pleasure. We believe that, right? Is Christ working in the centurion's house to bring about the healing of the slave? Will that slave know more about Christ because of the mediatorial work of his master? Yes, I'm driving it home because with this model right here, what you get to enjoy, which other people don't because of presuppositions that hinder them from access to the purity of God, is where Paul will say to masters, do not be brutish to your servant. Right. Look, one example, look with me. I think it's in the book of Colossians. I'll just start Colossians 3 and we'll shut it down here and we'll come back and pick it up for time's sake. But I love this one. And you know, it's in Ephesians 6 as well. But I think Colossians will do this for us. Colossians 4. Look at Colossians 4 verses 1 through, I'll just use verse 1. Notice what he says. Masters, give unto your slaves that which is what? Just and equal. Knowing that also ye have a what? Master in heaven. Right. These are landmines for bad thinking people. Landmines. Because what that means is that the first order of business for the Christian was not to extricate slaves from slavery, but to affect hearts and minds so that the different relationships that existed on the earth would be impacted from the inside out. So I'll give you another one as we get ready to close. What kind of ruler would Christ be if from heaven he simply poured down decrees that had nothing to do with the internal transformation of the souls of men, but simply told them by fiat what to do? What would he be considered? A dictator. A dictator. Would he not? And here you and I are all jacked up with all kinds of maladies, characteristically, flaws and everything in these relationships that are dysfunctional and broken. And all Jesus is saying to you is, stop it. And of course, if you don't, then there are consequences, right? Because an authority has to have force to implement against rebellion, against those external commands. But is that the nature of the gospel? No, the nature of the gospel is to change humanity from where? The inside out. So really what I'm giving you is the historical ethic of the gospel actually targeting the souls of men, changing people from the inside out, and allowing that change to disavow and dislodge a heartless, tyrannical relationships that may have existed between people groups. This is how slavery ended over the many millenniums that you and I have been on this planet, because hearts have been changed. The slave heart needs to be changed, but the master's heart does too, right? All right, so what if the master really, truly did come to Christ? And we know they did. We just saw the centurion, right? Centurion he's a big dog. He believes on the Lord Jesus, right? He loves his slave. What can we imagine will occur over time in the relationship between him and that slave? The love relationship between him and that slave will eventually emerge into the equality of Christian brotherhood. That's where we are in the Philemon study. What the Philemon study is going to drive us towards is Philemon understanding the predicament of owning a slave who is also a brother in Christ. Now, when the slave took off, he wasn't a brother. But when he came back, he was. So the relationship between Philemon and Onesimus is different than it was before. There is an additional element brought into the relationship now. Not only is Philemon saved, but Onesimus is saved. And that changes the relationship qualitatively, doesn't it? Well, it should. Because you and I know that today, in the freest conditions that human beings have ever been on the planet, we still have radically dysfunctional relationships that are equal or worse in some cases than a relationship with a master and a slave. Even though we're free people. This is why I said on Friday, the goal is not just freedom, because freedom doesn't make you a better person. See what I'm getting at?